In this video, let's walk through how to add and edit a keyboard shortcut for your SoundFlow commands. In SoundFlow, we call shortcuts keyboard triggers. A trigger in SoundFlow determines when a command should run. You can see the triggers for a command in the top right section of the editor page here. There are many different types of triggers. For example, we have keyboard triggers, MIDI triggers, and OSC triggers. So you can use all those types of input to start SoundFlow commands. For now, let's take a look at how to add a keyboard trigger to a command. First, we need to find a command that we want to add a shortcut to. If you look through the folder structure in the left side of SoundFlow, you can see all the packages. The ones with the blue icons indicate that they are commands that are built into SoundFlow. By clicking on the folders, you'll see a list of commands in that folder in the commands list here. For this example, I want to automate something in the automation window of Pro Tools. So I select the automation window package in the Pro Tools folder. In the right column, I select the command I want to use. In this example, I'm choosing the toggle preview command that toggles the automation preview state in Pro Tools on and off. I can test that the command works by clicking Run Command here, and as you can see, it toggles the preview state on and off. Now to add a keyboard trigger or shortcut to this command, I first click the New Trigger button and then choose Keyboard Trigger. In the trigger pop-up, I can now configure this. Let's use the shortcut Ctrl-P. So to record the keystroke, I click Record, then press Ctrl-P. And now we've registered our first keyboard shortcut. The trigger is already saved, so just click anywhere to close the pop-up. To test it, let's press Ctrl-P, and as you can see, it already works. Now maybe you want to limit this shortcut so that it only works when Pro Tools is a focused app. For example, you may want to reuse the shortcut Ctrl-P to mean something else if you're in another app. To set this up, let's click the trigger again to open the pop-up. If you look at the property, when these apps are focused, you can see that by default the trigger is set to work when all apps are focused. Let's instead set this to Pro Tools. Now I can press Ctrl-P when inside SoundFlow and nothing happens as designed. But when I switch to Pro Tools, Ctrl-P now toggles the preview state. Finally, if I want to delete my trigger, I just click the X in the top right corner of the trigger and it's gone. Now when we are talking about keyboard triggers, there's something important to note. That is, in SoundFlow, we have something we call SoundFlow default triggers. Basically, our default triggers are a set of keyboard triggers that we have already designed and mapped out for you. Some of these triggers are system-wide shortcuts that do stuff like move windows around your screens. Or for example, you can click Ctrl F1 to open SoundFlow or Ctrl Escape to bypass SoundFlow. Some of them add new shortcuts to Pro Tools that didn't exist before, and some of them override shortcuts that already existed in Pro Tools. The reason why we have these default triggers at all is to give you a starting point. SoundFlow has more than 500 built-in commands, so it could take a long time if you had to map out all your own triggers from scratch. If you choose to use our default triggers as a basis for your own shortcuts, you get a head start, and you can always turn them off one by one. But you can also choose to start from scratch if you'd prefer. It's up to you. Before we go into how to turn the default triggers on or off, let's go to the keyboard map page. Here you can see an overview of all the keyboard triggers that are currently mapped in your profile. For example, as you can see here, in the default triggers, we use the numbers 1 through 0 to allow you to open inserts on the currently selected track in Pro Tools. If you want to see what command a button is mapped to, just click on the button and it will take you back to the editor page and show you that command. Now you can see that this command has a default trigger assigned. You can identify a default trigger by its blue corner. So let's say in this case we don't want to overwrite the Pro Tools shortcut for Zoom presets. To fix this, simply click the toggle switch to disable the trigger here and repeat for any other default shortcut you want to disable. But it can be a little annoying if you have to manually disable each of the default triggers that you don't like one by one. So as promised, there's a solution to this to give you full control over whether you want to use our default triggers at all. If you click the profile menu, you get 3 options. No default triggers. This is if you want to make all your shortcuts yourself. Use SoundFlow default triggers to have our default triggers installed, and then you can disable the individual shortcuts you don't like. Or the last option, use SoundFlow default triggers disabled, where you get all of our default triggers, but they are disabled by default, so you have to turn them on one by one. If you're not entirely sure which option to use, we recommend that you use the last option. This way, we don't override any shortcuts that you're already using in Pro Tools, but you still have access to enable our default triggers one by one if you want. And finally, remember, no matter what you choose, all triggers can be edited, so you always have full control. So that's it. You've now learned how to add your own keyboard triggers, how to limit the keyboard trigger to a specific app, how to get an overview of your keyboard triggers via the keyboard map, how to disable and enable default triggers, and finally, how to control whether or not you want to use our default triggers to begin with. We know this can be a little complicated to understand, so if you have any questions or something's not working as expected, please ask a question on our forum so we can help you out. The forum is embedded inside the app, so just click the forum page here. You can also get help by clicking the question mark in the top right corner of SoundFlow. This opens a help panel. Here you can search for articles and watch videos on how to get started. Alright, I hope this will give you a good start to designing your own shortcuts in SoundFlow. In the next video, I'll walk you through how to create your own macros. Until then, happy SoundFlowing.